Hi, you've reached the High Fashion Hotline.
Hi, spiced apple cider is back, and so are the fall trends. My family needs new clothes to spice up our fall wardrobe.
Spice up their style with new jeans from Old Navy.
Old Navy?
Yep, starting tomorrow, all jeans from distressed to stretch are on sale from $15 for adults, $10 for kids. Plus, get up to 50% off store-wide.
All jeans on sale and up to 50% off store-wide?
That's right. All your family's favorite jeans are on sale starting tomorrow at Old Navy and OldNavy.com.
We can fall for that.
High Fashion, Old Navy. Valid 9/14 and 9/20. Excludes in-store clearance.
You're not going to bait me into a last-minute comment, Joseph. It's not going to happen. Oh, what? Oh, we're live. Oh, my God. That's Dean. As usual, this is the Supernet. Yes, this is the Supernatural Substation. No supposing about it. We are here because they have no hurricane heading toward us. Thank God. Thank God. This is the Supernatural Substation on the United Public Radio Network and iHeart Network participant. I'm Eileen Bastanio, your host, and my co-host is Bernadine.
In the wings.
In the wings, waiting in the wings, even though she's technically challenged tonight. We have our mascot. I'm sorry. Our mascot. He's in need of brains. He and a lot of people are in need of brains because there's some people, they're not going to leave whatever, Florida, the Keys or whatever. There's some like these diehard people, and Hurricane Irma is bearing down. They keep the weathermen busy, I guess, because it's, how do you say the same thing like every hour on the Weather Channel? It's a cat, whatever. It has these winds, and, they keep telling people this is serious. And, there was this 91-year-old woman talking to the mayor of Miami Beach saying, I'm not leaving. And he gave her his cell phone and said, call me if you need me. And she gave him her phone number and said, call me if you need me, which is cute. But, they're talking like a 12-foot storm surge, and that's just.
So the mayor's not leaving either?
Well, he's staying, but in a high-rise hotel that's going to put him. They're expecting a serious storm surge. And if you've been watching any of the updates coming out of the Virgin Islands and the Turks and Caicos, and it's Barbuda, or however you say it, Barbuda and Antigua, but our Barbuda especially had 95% devastation of all livable structures. The only things, it even tore down cement walls, and there were people that went through it talking about how they were hunkered down, but they'd see cars going over their heads. I guess from parking garages or whatever. And if you look at the footage, which is very scarce. So, that means there's really no way to communicate with them right now other than people, with their phones and uploading it to like YouTube and, sending it into the Weather Channel. But it's a serious storm. And then Jose, who is behind Irma, he is a Category 4. But all of the maps, I have a cousin who wanted to be a meteorologist, and another cousin who apparently wants to be, a meteorologist too. So I told him, I said, you need to start a YouTube channel called Not Meteorologist, because all week it's been, well, it may go west. Well, it may go this. If the front is coming, look, it was 50 something degrees in Louisiana, in South Louisiana last night. Okay. In New Orleans, it was a little bit higher, but still the front was coming. There was a cool front. And whenever that happened, I think we had a pattern like that for the last 2 years that just keeps the tropical moisture away from us. But, it's going to be terrible down there. The roads are gridlocked for some reason. There was no contraflow. They run out of gas. They run out of water. It's that and the aftermath. People commit suicide and everything. Looting. After so many days of it, like in Katrina, people go back to being animals. And they take what they want. So
survival mode.
Yeah, and traumatized too, especially if they went through it, or they come back and they see their home is not there or is so destroyed. I
I
mean,
don't think sandbags is going to help this time.
no, they were filling sandbags off the beach and stuff, but they've opened like, high school shelters and all that, 2 and 3 level buildings. But there were people they were talking to in a trailer park that were going to stay, and
Wow.
it doesn't just have to be a trailer park in Florida. A trailer park in general during a hurricane, it's like a bunch of empty Coke cans to a
Yeah.
hurricane. And every storm that we have is, there's major damage in mobile home parks. So Joe says he's going to go down there next week. What, to gloat? He's going to go gloat. Anyway, the other thing was the poor people in Texas are now rebuilding and in Beaumont. So how are things in your neck of the woods in Southwest Louisiana?
Everything's fine here.
Yep.
Having good weather.
Yeah.
Cool weather.
I mean, all the rivers finally went down. Nobody had water or
No.
anything like that. Well, see how lucky we are. And we were,
Yeah.
I was sweating this one too. But when they said, when every model except like one, once it was turning the thing up to the right and north because of the air, the cool air and the trough coming in. Well, I was like, it wasn't like all over the place like during Katrina. And then they were still saying, yeah, but Betsy did this. Yeah, but Andrew did, Katrina did this. And I'm like, you people, just like the weathermen on TV, you act like you want this storm to come. You act like you want this thing to get in the Gulf of Mexico. And I don't know why. Okay, because if it hits Mississippi or us, or it would be another Katrina. That would be it. I mean, it's a seriously huge monster of a storm. That CNN was talking about gender in relation to hurricane names.
What?
Yeah, they were saying that female storms, this was a correct observation. In general, the ones that are named after women are really more destructive, but that people in general tend to think that a male name like a Hugo or a Harvey or something is going to be more destructive. And so when it's a female named storm, they usually don't react, as quickly or as thoroughly as they might. And I just want to strangle the knotheads, because we can go, you and I, right? Betsy, Camille, Wilma, Debbie, Donna, Katrina, Rita. It's
so
so
do you
short.
think the hurricane knows it has a name?
Yeah, or is it gender conflicted? I don't know. It's an Irma. Maybe it wants to be an Irving.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because storms were coming in the, since the beginning of time. But in the 18 and 1700s to Louisiana, there are records of unnamed catastrophes that, and there was one in my daughter told me today in the 1930s that was more destructive than Katrina, per the land and the property that it damaged and all, and it had no name. So, you really, when you get to talking about the gender of acts of nature, or forces of nature, it's really, somebody needs a lobotomy at that point, and it ain't the hurricane. Because in my experience, it has been in the past where you can, you look at the names kind of and like a short, like a Irma or a Rita. It sounds like it's going to be a bitch, it sounds like, or, some little, whatever, Bonnie, or Betsy. It sounded like this is going to be a bitch when it hits, right? But Hugo, Ike, Ivan, George's, I mean, it doesn't matter what side of the list is it on, It's just, I cannot believe I heard that. That is just like, what? So how do we evacuate from a gender neutral? Do we do it gender neutrally? Anyway,
it's coming.
Yeah, it's a storm. It's coming, and get your ass out. And if you're not out, anyway, it's, I'm not gonna. That's not my purview on this show. But I'll be happy to complain and voice my opinion about it across Facebook and everything else. So, anyway, however, we have a guest coming up in about 15 minutes. Her name is, I'm sorry, Karen?
Lisa
Lisa.
Smartt.
I don't know why I want to say Karen. Lisa Smartt. And she's the author of a book called On the Threshold, which is about the basically words and the language of, let's see, sorry, what we say as we're nearing death, which is basically about the, things that people say, such as, oh, I see so and so, or oh, so she's going to go through that. It's a different take on the near-death experience. But in the meantime, last night I went to see It.
Yay.
It. And I have one thing to say. Tim Curry, who is that? This guy, Bill Skarsgård, the movie was, I mean, it's flawed. I have flaws. I can see them right away. But this guy and this clown and the way it was just it was awesome. Everybody should really go and see it. I don't have a fear of clowns. I'm just uncomfortable. But from the minute you meet, the minute he turns up in the drain and grabs the little boy, to the very last, moment of the film, which I won't give away, he just blew everything else away. So it was a phenomenal performance, and there will be a part 2, but it's Stephen King, and I'll tell anybody I would rather see a Stephen King movie, dramatized in like 90 minutes or, 2 hours or hour and 90 minutes to reading his books. And even in the movie, they had a couple of these because Stephen King is so colloquial. He's from Maine, and he writes into it these, these things, like you'll be reading along, really, enjoying the story, and then suddenly someone will say something like a little boy said in the movie last night, tickle your pickle. And it will totally just take you, what? I mean, that's when you realize, what the hell is that? And then you're reading a story. And there was another one that they added, I don't know, some kind of, credit to Stephen King or whatever. They left some of the, what I guess they thought were the cute comments, but it's like, and they had a couple of those. And it was perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. It's like, whenever I'm reading his books, not only are they like 3 inches thick, but there's always this, it's like somebody coming in and saying, where you at? In Yankee land. It's so like, what? So out of place. So not being a big fan, but and there was a mini series done back in the 90s, which is the one that Tim Curry, who did Dr. Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and he was also the devil or the demon or whatever in Legend. Well, he was good. And for a while he just was, but this guy, they really hit gold. Plus they have a lot more like computer generated effects that they can do. So it's a little bit more. So I say, you're not going to go. I know you're going to wait till you can see it at home. Because there was too much popcorn crunching in the show. And I'm going to tell you, like, that. You're sitting in a row and there's 4 seats, right, to your right. Okay. And then in the row right in front of you, there's a guy sitting right in front of you, and there's 4 feet to his right. And there's really not much difference. And then 4 people walk in. And I'm like, sit by the guys. No, they come and they sit by me. And if you would have hated it because everybody was on top of everybody. And immediately when the movie, when the thing went dim and they were watching the program, you start hearing the bags crinkling, like they're taking the candy out and everything. I'm like, no,
yeah,
I thought about you. I was like,
would have got a kick to the back of the head.
Mm-hmm. And then they were young kids behind us, or sort of young. I mean, I'm so old, and they would get up and they would think that they could use my seat. I'm sitting here, and then they push back on the seat, and the thing goes back, and I'm like, my feet are off the ground. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just here to, for a hand holder or whatever it is, for you to be able to get out of your seat. That's what I paid my money for. And so, yes, the 4 seats, they picked the ones by me, probably because I looked nicer than the guy that was sitting in front of me. And the kid that was sitting next to me, and I kept like kind of inching away. And I was thinking, he sat there, the smell of like when you find clothes in the back of the closet. that were dirty, like you wore. Well, he smelled like he was in clothes from like when school ended, like May. It was like his closet, sitting next to me. So, enduring all that to see the first night, the premiere of it was worth it, and it was really good. There are some things that I would have done differently, like, for instance, I wouldn't have shown the clown as quickly as they did. But there are other things that they do show that's just, and the kids are really funny. There's a couple of really funny kids in there, which is good because they're written that way in the book. And there will be a part two with them grown up. And the story of it, the clown comes back every 27 years, and it happens to be just 27 years from when they released the miniseries one. So I thought that was kind of significant. I thought Tim Curry had died. I'm like, okay, didn't he die? I thought there was this whole thing about him dying, but
don't they kind of remind you of the new Insidious that's coming out? Because the lady that played the psychic died in the last movie, but she's in the next movie.
I saw that, and it's got keys on its hands. I think I posted it on the Supernatural Substation that Friday. The page. No. Yeah. By the way, you can find us on Facebook, and please go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Which I dropped the ball a little bit this week. I didn't have last week's show, so I'm sorry. I'll take care of it. But we need the subscribers, and you'll find all kind of fun stuff on Facebook. The Supernatural Substation. Check it out. But that looks very interesting, and I don't know at what point she's going to be, because in the first movie, there she was, and she went wherever, and then she was in the movie
Into the Further.
Right, Into the Further, which I would have not called it that at all. And then she dies, and then she comes back, and then in 3, she's living, and it's before the other stuff happened, and then she dies, or she sees her dead husband, and it's jumping all over the place. And the reason that the first Insidious was good was it was James Wan. And he is the one responsible for Annabelle, the Conjuring movies, that I hope and pray there's going to be an Amityville. He's doing The Crooked Man, and The Nun that was in Conjuring 2 is a separate movie that he's either producing or directing himself. So he's brilliant. And that's the reason, that the first Insidious was good. The second one was watchable, but this one seems to have, the demon that was in the first one is, apparently starring in it or is in it, as the main evil character. I don't know. So it's never ending. I guess you could go in the future, in the past, in a parallel universe.
The beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like Annabelle, the new beginning. Annabelle.
Yeah, I didn't get to see that. It is still playing, so I might check it out. But I've been seeing it, and we kind of said, yeah, we focused on that one and said, let's go see that, because the previews were so damn good.
And they've been showing the other It on TV.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, well, before this one came out.
Maybe they shouldn't have done that, because that really does illustrate. Look, I like Tim Curry, but I liked him better as the demon thing in Legend with Tom Cruise and all, because he didn't really scare me in it. He really didn't. Last night, the teeth, let me just say, the teeth are much more. Were they pointy? They're much more prevalent in this version of it. Believe me, he's much more of a monster, and the makeup and everything. Because this guy is 20 something or 30 years old. He does it so well. He does a clown so well. And that's hard to do. The way that he makes the kid, first little boy, Georgie, comfortable with him is that he talks like he's at a circus. And I bet you would like this balloon, and I bet you this, and and then the kid says, but I don't know you, my parents are a stranger. And then he introduced, now you know me. And he was just perfect. And you could just the evil was behind everything that he was saying, as he was luring the kid. So, and when was that? Oh, Tuesday night, I think, or at some night this week, American Horror Story this season premiered, American Horror Story Cult, which has a bunch of clowns in it. And Twisty the Clown, who was from Freak Show, he makes a reappearance, and I don't know how it is, but the very first episode, everybody thought it was going to be really politically leaning toward, and it's sympathetic to the left, but it isn't 100% on either side. It basically, the goal is like to show how crazy people are on both sides of the spectrum, you know. And so, but Sarah Paulson, who's been in it from the beginning, is the woman has a fear of clowns. And,
does she?
Yeah, colorophobia, or let me see, I brought it up. And yes, I don't have a fear. I guess I would if it was Pennywise, but I get creeped out, and it is called, oh heck, COUL, colorophobia. Okay, colorophobia, and it's the fear of clowns. And I was listening to a woman talk about it, which is because it's more of a phobia. It becomes like a true fear if you know, like it incapacitates you. Like you see a clown and you're just completely, you know, you can't function or something. And that's pretty much what happens in American Horror Story. So, colorophobia, the fear of clowns. Joe, I don't know what you want. Text me or message in the room. So the psychologist says in this article, basically a lot of people fear them because of their makeup, and people mistrust when they can't see facial expressions and things like that. And either it's always smiling or it's always frowning, and you can't really see the person that's underneath, because we judge most people by their appearance, their facial appearance, and then their facial expressions. You know, that's how you assess somebody if you're going to, you know, as you approach a stranger or whatever. And this is all screwed up.
Well, you know that, I don't know if I had told you, one of the guys on my team, he's a big guy, bald and stuff. He looks spooky. Well, every year at Spirit Halloween in Lafayette, he dresses up as something like Pinhead or some creepy monster. Well, they told him this year he cannot dress as a clown and stand in front of the store.
Well, why? That's clown hating.
Because it came out, and I know it's clown hating. They will not let him do that because he may scare the children. I'm like, who would go to that store if they're not going to walk in and be scared to begin with? Who would bring their children?
Exactly.
Yeah. He's forbidden to be a clown this year.
That's wrong. That would bring in a lot of you know, traffic.
Yes, it would, honestly. Especially because it just came out.
And you know, it's the whole thing. I think it was last year and part of this year where their creepy clowns were showing up all over the place. Like there was one that I even saved the picture of, because it was like 3 a.m. and there's this clown walking with a balloon down deserted streets, and somebody was going home from a bar or whatever and photographed this thing. You know, so it's the whole unknowing, and you don't know what he's up to and all that other stuff. I mean, I think I've talked about this, but I read the article again. Bill Skarsgård, who plays in it, he said that his makeup, and while he was in character, some of the kids ran away and they broke down. Like the younger ones, they broke down. They were scared to death of him. And he'd have to go and say, look, it all comes off. And he'd let him, you know, take it off, take some of the makeup off and stuff. But, you know, it doesn't help that he's like a method actor too. So method actors are it. I mean, they are whatever they're playing. They are that until the end of the day or at the end of the shoot or whatever. So, but
didn't you send me something about somebody or people putting red balloons near the sewer things?
Yeah,
like 200 and something of them.
Yeah, and I posted it again on the page, and it was I think it was they did it in Stephen King's hometown, or where he's living now, but they also did it in some other town in Maine. Yeah, they had put them by the sewers, and you know, in different other locations around the town. And that's just, Joe, cut it out. He's making noise. That's just brilliant. You know, the red balloons. the only thing that I would say, I may have just said that. I think they should have. I think they played their hand too quickly in exposing him, in exposing the clown, putting him out in front a little bit too early. You know, if it was me, the writer or whatever, well, I would have let there be some mystery until he finally revealed himself. But that, you know, that's a minor thing.
Mm-hmm.
That to get, you know, there's nothing to get annoyed about. It's just like I might do that differently. But otherwise, it's unintentional, but it's a great horror movie. And that's the difference between terror and horror. And there's a little bit of, I guess, a little bit of both. So I'm hearing all kind of scrambling noise.
I think our
Yeah.
guests may be in the room.
Yeah. Are you, okay. Are you seeing it? All right. You want to go ahead and introduce her and call her in? Lisa, is that it?
Lisa, are you there?
I am here. Good evening.
Thanks for being with us. Yes, we can hear you now.
It's a pleasure. I can hear you. Thank you. Yeah,
we were just talking about it because I went to see, I'm Aline Pastanio. I'm Bernadine's co-host. I went to see the movie last night, and I highly recommend it if you like that movie.
I would love to. Oh, how great! Yeah,
it's great. Yeah, I would definitely go see it because, well, we were like the first show, and we got some little collectible thing or whatever, but it was really very good. It was a success.
Was it scary?
It was, yeah, it was scary and creepy in the way a good horror movie is.
Yeah.
And I was just talking about how horror and terror are two different things. Like terror is Jason, you know, with the hatchet and the hockey mask or whatever. But this was like horror because it had that gothic feel about it. And yeah, so, you know, I prefer that to, you know, it's sort of like this just slash and gash movies, but it had its fair share of blood too. It was really good. So if you get a chance, I'll go see it. So Bernadine's going to tell us a little bit about you. You have the bio up?
Yes.
Okay, let's introduce our guest.
Okay. Lisa Smartt has 5 years ago, I listened in stunned silence as my skeptical and rational father described seeing angels in his last days of life. 3 days before dying, he announced the angels say only 3 days left now. He spoke of green dimension and his room crowded with people who were unseen to me. He also spoke in poetic and metaphoric language, describing a big art show that was approaching and the boxes he had to carry for the Ramus wife of 54 years. I can't say that word. But anyway, and you do work with Dr. Moody?
Yes, yeah.
That's awesome. We had him on the show last year.
Oh, yeah. He, one of the greatest blessings of the last 5 years has been doing, really of my whole life, but it's been these last 5 years working with Raymond, and we continue to work together. And I relocated from California all the way to Georgia just to be near him, and it was I'm happy. I have no regrets about making the move.
He's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. So,
can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you for having me here this evening. My background's in linguistics, and I've always had an interest in language and how language reflects consciousness in the way we process language. And I went to school at UC Berkeley, and at the time I specialized in the difference in the language of women and men. And it's changed a lot, but that was back in the 80s, and we saw certain similarities in the way at the time, the way women spoke and the way men spoke, and we were able to make generalities about that, and those have, as I keep saying, have transformed over the years. So that's where I began, with sort of psycholinguistics and the interest in how the mind and language come together and how much is revealed through our words. And then I ended up having a career working with adults with learning disabilities, with dyslexia, and that was a puzzle because you could really, again, through language, watch how people processed their experiences, right? And we've come to find with dyslexia that many times people who have dyslexia also have tremendous gifts. So what might look on the surface like a, quote, problem, unquote, actually is also an indication that people are processing their experience in different ways than those who aren't. And partly those ways are more nonverbal and more intuitive and visual with dyslexics. So anyway, I've always just been interested in the cross-section between how the mind works and figuring it out and how language reflects that. So when I was 53 and I loved my career, I had never expected I would be doing this research. But I got the phone call that my father was very sick. And as you had mentioned in the intro, my father was a PhD psychologist, very bright, very lucid. And there he was. It turned out to be about 3 weeks before he died. My mother called me and told me he had walked out the front door of the house midnight on a cold January evening and walked down the street in his underwear. And when the police came and stopped him, he said he was going to the big art exhibition and he was carrying boxes for my mother's art opening. Well, he had no boxes in his hand. There was no art gallery. And really, it was as if he was announcing a big event and it was coming. And my mother was an artist, and for the 50 years they were married, or 57 years, he had always carried her boxes to the art opening. Well, obviously, when we got the call from the police that my father had said these things, and we were all we went. They brought him to the hospital, and we met my father there. At the time, I didn't know that many times, as people begin to enter the kind of a before they die, sometimes weeks, days, months, there's this kind of pronouncement of this big event, and so my father made this big announcement, and he started the dying process. He had gotten a terrible infection based on radiation treatment he had gotten for cancer. His prognosis before the infection was quite good. It was just prostate cancer, not just, but a type of cancer that's usually quite treatable. But he got a very serious infection from it, and within 3 weeks after him announcing the big event and the big art show, he started going into the dying phase. And during those 3 weeks, I was with him a lot. I worked about an hour away. I lived and worked an hour away, but obviously was happy to drive over after work every day. And as he was dying, this man who was one of the most lucid, clear-minded communicators I've ever known was speaking in the most unusual and remarkable ways, and being a linguist and trained to write down words all the time, I wrote down everything he said. And during that 3-week process, he talked about angels. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier is that my father was a complete skeptic. He was one of these people who, if I mentioned a word like angel, he would roll his eyes and go, yeah, And he was from New York. I don't know if you cut in, New York, and he smoked a cigar. It's like, yeah, my afterlife is with the worms down 6 feet below. That's afterlife to me, So he was a really down to, salt of the earth guy. So well educated, but still very, very down to earth. And then he started talking to me about seeing angels in the room. And one day he said, "Oh my God, Lisa, there are angels," So that part of his language stunned me, because this was a man who completely would have never talked about angels. And then there were just other changes where there were a very rich metaphoric language, nonsense that was unusual for me to hear from him. And I wrote things down, and after he died, besides being a grief-stricken daughter, which I was, of course, I was also a very curious linguist, and I was wondering if there had been research done on this area of the people's final words, what they say in those last days and weeks before dying. So I went back to UC Berkeley, to the libraries where I studied for many years, and looked in the databases thinking I would find at least some research about final words, because we have lots of research about children's speech, right, how people acquire speech when they're young. And there was nothing from the perspective of the linguistics or the language of end of life, except for the wonderful book by Maggie Callanan and Patricia Kelly called The Final Gifts. So I was just possessed with curiosity. You know, there were so many things I witnessed when my father passed, and also my father was terrified of dying. And before this process, and what stunned me also is in the 3 weeks as he was dying, he seemed so much at peace and talked about seeing a green dimension, and I don't know, he spoke some nonsense, but he talked about leaving, moving up out of his body and coming back down, and there's just speech that was going on that was so different than what he would have ever expressed when he was alive.
What do you think? I'm sorry. Finish what you're saying.
Oh, no. Yeah.
What do you think the green dimension is?
I thought about that. One of the things that I've spoken about in other interviews is I strongly recommend other people, if they're comfortable doing so, to write down their loved one's final words, because at the time I couldn't make, I was like, I don't know. The only thing it just seemed like a very lush and beautiful world he had entered. It was, he wasn't saying, oh, it's barren and I'm dying and it's horrible, right? He talked about this lush, rich green dimension. And but it's funny because a little after my father died, as I mentioned, I came out to Georgia to study with Raymond Moody, which I'll mention more about later. And we came and we were looking for a home here, and it just happened we found this really just the perfect house for us on Green Crest Drive. Maybe it was a coincidence, right?
I don't know, because if you read, that immediately put me in mind of Tolkien, and the description, the description of heading west and seeing, the rain curtain, pulls back and you see a far green space. And a lot of people who have had near-death experiences describe seeing that, seeing this lush and just like a lawn or a field, and people are there to welcome them. So I don't know. I mean, maybe in your dad's case and in their case too, it was some buried memory, maybe from childhood, but that was, distant but familiar. I don't know. That's just my speculation about it. But a lot of people have talked about it being, this really verdant, vivid, place. It's really peaceful, I guess, summertime or springtime place, that they go to. So I was curious to know your take on that.
Yes. Well, it did, when you asked about my father, that was my first association, but it emerged a fair amount in the transcripts. There was one great story of two sisters who described that their father had talked about this, just what you had mentioned, this lush, tree-filled, hilly landscape, and he turned to them and said, it's so beautiful, I don't know which door to choose. And that's another theme I've seen in many final words, or several final words transcript, is having to choose a door. But again, on this backdrop of a very beautiful landscape. So, yeah.
So are you taking like the transcripts of your experience with your father and comparing them to others? In other words, like, are you looking for those recurring? Obviously the tunnel is a recurring theme, right? Everyone says, I feel like I'm in a tunnel in a bright light. So that's so well known, that immediately, anybody would recognize that as a near death, as an explanation of near death. But not everybody sees the same thing once they go through that tunnel. So are you like compiling comparisons of, shared experiences?
Yes. And what I'm doing is slightly different. Maybe I'll backtrack and then answer that question. Raymond and I met each other right after my father died, and I did this research and saw that no one else had looked at people's final words. So the near-death experience that Raymond researched 1975 his book came out, and now there are people all around the world looking at the near-death experience. But that is, someone actually clinically is dead, right, when they have a near-death experience, and then they come back to tell their, share their account. And what Raymond found with these accounts, he was a philosophy PhD before he was a medical psychiatrist, medical doctor student, and he was very interested in nonsense, and sort of the nonsense like in Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, and he was just intrigued by it, and he wrote his PhD on the subject of nonsense. So when he then went for an MD, he noticed that when people died and came back, they were talking in these very nonsensical ways. Just, first of all, people would talk about seeing lush colors and vivid landscapes when, of course, medical science at the time couldn't imagine such a thing, because when you're dead, there's no brain waves going on. How could you be seeing such remarkable things? But people were reporting these paradoxical things, saying things like, I felt like I was gone for 1 minute, but it also felt like an eternity, or I never felt as alive as when I was dead. These, I was in my body, but out of my body, things like that. And he noted, because he had a love for nonsense, he wrote down all these things that people would say after they died and came back. And the most common thing, people would always preface their descriptions of what happened to them with, there's just no words for it. It's ineffable. It's just no words for it. So he's been very intrigued about the limits of language, and how when we come to these very exceptional experiences in our lives, oftentimes the language that we use, like the literal language we use, such as hand me a glass of water, is oftentimes not enough for these extraordinary experiences, such as a near-death experience. So what happened is, after my father died, I was, as we go on, I'll tell you more of the patterns that I found in my father's speech, and then how I think we have now 2,000 final words that we've collected and organized into categories. But, I was struck that my father seemed to be into a different state of consciousness as he was dying. And it wasn't just what we think of as a blank slate, no more brain activity. It actually seemed that his brain was more alive than ever in a certain kind of way, because of the richness of some of his metaphors or things that he was seeing. So when I met Raymond, I was really baffled by this. And my father said this sort of paradoxical speech. I was really interested. So I landed up synchronistically. A friend of my mother's was teaching with Raymond Moody a little after my father passed on, and I was filled with curiosity. So I flew out to Alabama to go to the seminar, and the fourth day, Raymond started talking about his love and fascination with metaphor and nonsense as it related to the near-death experience. And he also said he was intrigued by people's final words. And my ears perked up. And I was, oh, you're interested in that? Oh, my God, that's my obsession right now. I'm a linguist, and I'm very curious. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. I've been looking for someone who's a background in linguistics who might want to research people's final words. So it's actually not part of the near-death experience. It's more what people call the nearing death awareness or experience. So Raymond and I had this conversation, and when he said he would be interested in working with me, my goodness, I retired early. I was 53. I was just able to retire early, and I sold everything. Our kids were off to school already, thank goodness, and I was in a position where it was great. We got rid of everything. We jumped in our Mustang. Bye to everyone. It was one of the wildest things I've ever done in my life, and I could just feel my Father's Spirit blessing me as I did it. And we drove out to Georgia so I could work with Raymond. And so he taught me so much about the near-death experience, and then together we've learned about people's nearing death experiences through people's final words.
Dean, you got any? I know you have some questions, so I'm going to let you come in.
Yes. I don't know if you, in your research, sat with hospice patients,
Hmm.
but my question, when my grandmother was in hospice, she was at my aunt's house, and um, she was kind of crippled up, her bones and stuff. She was like in a fetal position. She couldn't speak or anything like that. And the hospice nurse was saying that a lot of times, right before someone passes, no matter what their physical condition is or mental condition, that there is one day right before they pass
Yes.
that they're going to act like nothing ever happened. They'll sit up, and talk to you. And we're like, there's no way. She's been like this for so long, had a feeding tube. And I mean, there's no way. And my aunt called me on the phone one day, and she's like, your grandmother's sitting up in bed and she's talking
Right.
to us like she doesn't even know she's sick. She's like, you
Yeah.
need to get here right now. So I flew over there, and I mean, I drove there. I didn't fly there. Um, it's a Louisiana thing. Um, I went there, and that's exactly what she was doing. She was sitting up in bed. She looked healthy. She was speaking
Amazing.
to us. She asked me if she can come and visit my house. She knew I was building a house, and it's things that she couldn't have known.
Yes.
And there's no way she could have been. And we didn't tell her, you're in hospice, you're dying. We weren't gonna, ruin her mood. She was in a good mood, and we didn't want to make her frightened. We just were in awe, like, oh my God, I can't believe she's just sitting here speaking to us like this. And then after a while, she lay back down and she went back into her fetal position. She went back to not speaking, like it was a different person. Well, she was her old self for a minute. She couldn't get up and get out of the bed, but she was just talking like fast, and the whole family was around the bed, and then the next day she was gone.
Yeah, there are so many things that I've learned through this research, and the experience you had is so common. And it's called terminal lucidity or the sunset day. And I had several stories from people, and I'll just share a few of those with you that are similar to exactly what you're describing. One was a case where this woman had mentioned that her father-in-law was always critical of her. He was just kind of a critical person. And he actually said she was kind of on the chubby side, and he was not nice about it. He was just not very nice about it. He would always say, are you sure you want to have that piece of cake? Just not nice. And
Sounds like my family.
uh-oh. Uh-oh. And it was something, that was hurtful obviously to her, and and right before he passed, he had this same kind of day because he had been very unresponsive, and then he had this one day. And oftentimes when people have this terminal lucidity, they also talk about food. They want to have a food they really love, and he loved beer. So he asked for a beer, which of course everyone was happy to give him. And then he turned to her and looked and said, "Oh my, I never realized how pretty you are."
Mhm.
He said, "I am so sorry. I just never saw what a pretty woman you are." And one of the things is that when people are in this terminal lucidity, so far I have not heard one case where someone, gets out of that fetal position or that unresponsive and says something like, "You were such a creep," or "I've always hated your husband." People always, or what we have at least, and I'm sure somewhere there are exceptions, but at least in our research, there are always words of love or reconciliation or joy or appreciation, or at least just normal conversation. Um, there was one example of this that you're talking about that just completely, if I didn't trust the person as much as I trusted him, I worked with him, I knew he was just a very honest man, I maybe wouldn't have believed him. But he told me that his mother had Alzheimer's for 2.5 years, and then she had a coma, so was basically unresponsive. 3 days before she died, she gets up, looks at him, and says, all the files you need to settle all the financial affairs for after I die are in the third drawer down in my drawers in the study.
Oh.
He was stunned. I mean, he had not had any intelligible conversation with his mother. I think it had been years and years. So he was struck. But this is what we have, many stories, and scientists are only now beginning to really study this more carefully. But so many remarkable. I'll tell you two more short ones. One person was in a coma, and then he got up, turned to his loved one, and said, "It's not what you think."
Okay.
It's like, whoa. Another time the person got up, because this terminal lucidity can be anywhere from like 1 minute to a whole day. It varies.
Mm-hmm.
With my father, he got up and he wanted me to make him pot roast because he loved it when I made him pot roast. So I made him pot roast, and he was chatting away about so and so, and just chatting away as if he, just as you described. Another one was a woman came out, and the rest of the family had gone out to dinner, but this one son was there, and she just said, "Tell everyone I'm okay and that I love them."
Oh.
So
Okay.
it's a pretty fascinating window of time, and it makes me believe, because generally the words are so kind and loving, or at least connecting. It's hard for me to believe that there isn't some kind of consciousness outside of our body that returns or something. How does this happen? I don't have an answer for how, but it definitely is thought-provoking.
It is thought-provoking. I mean, I guess I often describe it when we're talking about spirits of the dead, in a way that you would call ghosts or whatever, as the spirit personality. The person is the spirit. At least that's when anyone has asked me about ghosts. It's, obviously our body decomposes. Whatever makes us move around and keeps us alive, that's the soul. But the spirit that, I know as Bernadine, or I knew as my father, that continues on, because otherwise, how do you really recognize, a lot of people in these experiences say, they saw their father, they're deceased or whatever, there's a recognition involved. And that's because it's the personality that we interact with all our lives. So we see that on the other side. So some of that, that obviously survives. My father, he died in November of 2015, and it actually was a process of a month, and he was petrified the entire time. He really didn't have anything like that in the hospital, but in the months leading up to his first hospitalization that ultimately ended when he passed, he was talking a lot with basically things we couldn't see. And it wasn't unpleasant, like ghosts or, he wasn't, I would pass his room and he would be sitting there, in his lounge chair talking to, a child, it would seem, because he wasn't looking up at an adult level. He was looking, straight on. And he had often, when he had gone like under anesthesia in other procedures and all, he, had often talked about a blonde-haired, or what looked like a blonde-haired girl. And she was always there, even though, he thought at one time they were making a movie and, Louis Gossett Jr. was starring in it. All of that, and then he would say, "Who is that girl? Who is that girl?" And I'd ask him, I said, "Do you recognize her?" And he says, "No." He would say, "No." And I said, "Do you see anybody that you recognize?" And he'd say, "No." And I'd say, "Okay." I don't know who the girl is, but as long as mama's not here or anything, to come get. But it was different when he passed. I think he was consumed with fear, and my mother too. There was no way of really, it was like, he was congestive heart failure, and the only way to keep him comfortable was to give him medication that basically cut off, the communication process. So, and it was, so I didn't really have last words. I knew he was afraid when he asked me to stay overnight with him. He wanted me to stay. But it was a month-long process, and we really didn't. it wasn't like my grandmother, my mother's mother. She died. They worked on her for 20 minutes. She had a lung embolism or whatever.
Mm.
And they worked on her for 20 minutes and they were signing the death certificate and she coughed and she came back and she lived for 12 more hours. It's like,
Oh my. Wow.
um, you just weren't, she was a woman in life. You were not going to tell her anything. It was, my grandmother was like, you ain't telling me, anything that I'm supposed to be doing. So in other words, she wasn't ready to die right then. And oddly enough, I mean, everybody in the family came because when she died the first time, my
Oh.
grandpa got on the phone and called everybody, her sisters, Rosie's dead, Rosie's. So when, 12 hours later, everyone was there, including her son, who had been fishing in the Gulf of Mexico and would have missed it
Oh
otherwise.
my.
So there was a real, and the only time she said anything was she called out um, my grandpa's name, and that
Oh
was
wow.
it. And then she just passed peacefully after everybody was there. So maybe that was a goal. But unfortunately, there hasn't been any like like the gold is buried or any of that, in my family. Unfortunately, so the pirate treasure is the maps up there. No, they just kind of, just shut up and die, I guess. Oh
Well,
yeah.
it is interesting to me because one of the things that I write about in my book is that a flaw, and we know it's a flaw of this research, is that I didn't want to put digital recorders next to people's beds while they're dying because I just feel it's too sacred a private time, and most hospices probably would not have given us permission to do that. So I had to rely on people sharing their stories and their accounts with me and with us, meaning Raymond and me. And so the flaw of our research, of course, is the stories that may be more difficult or of course, where there are not that many words, people are less likely to share, but also the deaths that might be more difficult, we don't have necessarily in our research. We have a few cases, but not many. And, the stories you told about your father and it wasn't necessarily a really difficult death, but people seem to have a real variation in how much they come to peace with their dying through the process. And we know that while people are dying, they often have these really remarkable dreams. And sometimes dreams can really be a way to help people come to peace and start that they see, people describe seeing death and dying either through their dreams or through the metaphors, which I'll share with you in 1 second. Also, that, it's a journey that they're on. They're in some kind of journey, and that they see the journey is really nothing that isn't frightening. And, of course, people do see all kinds of visitors. And when I was talking to hospice volunteers and nurses recently, and one woman raised her hand, she said for her it's the number one indication that death is approaching when people start talking about visitations, usually from family members or loved ones, because earlier on in the dying process, sometimes people will see someone like that blonde woman or just a figure that they can't identify. But so many people in the sample were like, Mom, or here's Earl, or there are stories. Here, let me read this. He had said just a few words, hallelujah, my wife. He had a big smile on his face, and I don't remember hearing anything else from him again.
Oh wow. Yeah, well, I had my father's cousin died, and he was in intensive care. We had an aunt that was we named Aunt Louise, and whenever anybody in the family was sick, she would go there and she would nurse them and she would take care of them. And so he was in and out of like a semi-comatose state in the intensive care unit. And he said he kind of opened his eyes, he looked in a corner where no one was, and he said, "I'm not ready, Louise. I'm not ready." And then and his daughter was sitting there, my cousin Leslie. And then the next day, he said, "Louise," and he looked up and he said his dad's name, or he said Dad. And then he said, I'm ready, and he died. I mean, basically, Aunt Louise came back with somebody, that he would
Sure.
respect, or who would, indicate, that you need to come, so it's just bizarre. I mean, and I used to have sort of a, just total positive, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be wonderful on the other
Yes.
side. But the more that I've observed, like, I'm in no hurry. I get closer to the front of the line, and I'm like, I don't care. But I wanted to tell you, we did figure out who the little blonde girl might be.
Ah.
He had a sister who was younger, and he was born in 1927.
Oh my.
And she had died when she was a toddler in
Oh
a
my.
high chair accident. Her high
Oh
chair was knocked
my.
over. And, she lived 2 weeks with a concussion, but then she passed. And, I was thinking about, it's Isabel, it's his sister, but she's in a state that is grown enough to be able to relate to him. That's
Oh,
what I feel
amazing.
anyway. And people do say that we appear, or that we
Yes.
return to our healthiest condition. And so
Yes.
she would have been a toddler and unable to talk, but it's the only little girl it could be, because until after her, it was me in the family. Many, many years later, no other ones have been born. So, and it was a realization. Isabel, who would have been my aunt, came to get him, and that's who he's been talking to
Wow.
for like 2 or 3 months before.
Wow.
Anyway, I'll pitch it to you, Dean. I know you got some other questions.
Yeah. Great stories.
Have you ever heard of any last words from children that were dying?
Yes, and let me see if I have, I don't have, I'm going to go, I may be a little inaccurate, so bear with me because I don't have my book, I don't have those notes with me right now, but I'll be glad to share those. What's fascinating to me about children, children oftentimes have so much wisdom at the end of life, and there are several cases of children referring to the angels. That what you had described a minute ago about looking up at the rafters or looking up to the corner, and people's eyes widening.
Mm-hmm.
That's common, and then people oftentimes refer to angels. And there are some very sad and touching stories of children really reassuring their parents and saying, "Mama, it's okay, because I'm going back to the angels." Or the angels are taking me, and it gave their mothers a lot of comfort. There was one story of one girl, I think she was 13, dying of cancer, and she asked the nurse if they could leave some baby clothes and some money for her for when she has a baby in heaven. And I
Oh.
thought that was really touching.
Mm.
And the children, like um, the adults, talk about going on a journey, and that's one of the most common things we found in the language. And they also found it. Patricia Kelly and Maggie Callanan, their book, also wrote about this. That people talk a lot about taking a journey, and refer to metaphors of travel. They may say that they're waiting for a bus is coming, or in one case, this really wonderful chaplain was called in to work with someone at hospice who was complaining about needing his passport. And this is a very common scenario, complaining about losing his passport. And the chaplain said, "Oh, you lost your passport? That sounds very upsetting." And the guy says, yes, it is. I cannot go where I need to." And she said, "Oh, wow, you cannot go. You're stuck." "Yes, I'm stuck here between two countries. I'm here, but I want to be there." "Oh, you want to be there?" "Yes, I so long to be there." Yes, the chaplain said. "You so long to be there." And then he calmed down and he said, "Yes, I long to be there." So children as well as adults often make references to going somewhere and having a very distinct feeling that they're traveling to another place. And people refer to going home a fair amount. One woman's grandmother said, "Yellow bus, there's the bus." And she said, "Well, where's the bus driving you, Grandma?" "Well, I'm not sure, but there are sure a lot of angels." So I thought that was cute.
Now,
But
that's what I was going to ask you, because your father was a skeptic. And I mean, did he believe in God, or was he, an atheist as well?
yes,
And what did he describe the angels as looking like, or did he? Because,
yeah.
a lot of people see them with wings and they're really not like that, but I guess they appear that way to comfort people. So, I mean, did he kind of let on what the description was?
Those are two really good questions. The first one is my father. I'm Jewish, and of course he was Jewish, and he used to say that he was a gastronomical Jew, and what that meant for him, God was a corned beef sandwich with cream soda on the side. So that's the kind of guy he was. He loved life. He was a man of the senses, but he absolutely did not believe that there was a God. And he believed in nothing beyond this world. And that's why, his words were so remarkable, because frankly, I've always had kind of an interest. I've had this sense, I've just always had there was something more. Both of my parents were, at least as I was growing up, were atheists. And so what really struck me about his final words, it's one thing if someone's believed in angels their whole life and then they talk about angels at the bedside. I mean, of course, it's still amazing, but it's more powerful if there's someone who is a skeptic and starts talking about it, because then you think, oh my goodness, I mean that was, if you knew my dad, you would see what a huge change that was for him. And yeah. So I guess that answers your question. Oh, you're interviewing me, but I am really curious. When you talked about angels not looking, this is what I was going to say, and I want to hear what you mean by angels not looking like angels, because one of the biggest regrets I have, and I don't know if other people feel this way with their own parents, but because when my father was dying, he was still an authority figure. I mean, he was still my father, and I still sort of saw him as a quote authority, even though I was already 53, right? But for me, when he was dying, I felt a little shy about probing him, and I was also kind of scared, because here is my dad. Is he hallucinating? Is it the drugs? So he didn't have many drugs at the end of life, and I was scared to probe too much, because my dad was kind of a prickly guy, and I didn't want to, I was just afraid. So now looking back, one of the biggest regrets I have is I didn't say, oh, Papa, you're seeing angels. What do the angels look like? And I think the biggest thing I would pass on is a little teeny bit of wisdom that I've gotten from this research is that, even if someone's saying, oh, there's a dog running up on the top of my ceiling right now, or something that seemed totally crazy, really engage in a conversation and don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid. And I don't know if I was really afraid when he spoke of the angels, but I was so stunned I didn't even know what to do or say, and I didn't want to do anything that would offend him. I don't know what I would. I don't know. It's just I was afraid, and now I wish so much that I had asked him about those angels.
Well, my dad, close, and my brother has said this too. I guess it goes with getting closer up the line, but my dad would question whether there was, a God. The closer he got, as he aged and stuff like that. And the closest thing to an angelic type being that he saw was the blonde girl. And I really believe that's, but he never said she has wings. He would say, who is that blonde there? Who's that? And the first time he did it, it was coming out of anesthesia. And we were like, oh yeah, because after my mom died when she was 59, and my dad was only 60. And he had like another life, he was like, he used to be a good dancer. Well, he was a great dancer when they were young. And he always, so he kind of got back into that. I used to call him a lounge lizard, because he'd be out all night and sleep all day. What are you doing? With these, in the 80s clothes. And I was like, yeah, or the 90s. Like, yeah, out there. And he actually had women, and he didn't want me to meet any of them, because I was going to tell him, hey, you think this is a rich widower? My mama left him with no money to spend. It's like, but he never said, oh, I see an angel with wings, or anything of the sort, and according according to occult tradition, angels don't look anything like what people, and according to the Old Testament. But in the traditions of the Quran and in Persian magism, etc., they're extraordinary. Extraordinary beings. If you read, in Ezekiel and in the other biblical accounts of people encountering angels with the multiple eyes and the spinning wheels and, things just basically sticking out and four faces. And it's nothing like the little cherubs and seraphim and all this other stuff, that have basically come down to us in art. It's actually more accurate of what they are than what, because I think all of this, little baby angels and the white gowns and blonde hair and the, just the wings and everything, it kind of, puts people in a wrong, sort of a mistaken reality about them, because angels are really, they can be good or bad. At least I'm talking from an occult perspective and basically, and from a biblical perspective, because they can do good that is evil to you, but it's for your own good, or they can be neutral. These are entities that, can at the blink of an eye be in some other universe that we don't even know about. So in other words, it's like, so much for not driving faster than your guardian angel, can, I think they can handle a car, so, oh, my dog is barking. But, that's, yeah, you'll hear her. She's like a mascot too.
Oh, I know. I have an owl here where we live out in the backyard, and it always seems just when I need I don't know, support, that owl, it comes right by my window or starts hooting. It's really great. I don't have a dog anymore. He passed away, but I do have an owl.
I have a loud dog who doesn't know when not to bark. So. He's a puppy. He's a Doberman, but
I thought one of the pieces of research that I want to do to extend what we've done is look at communication from animals around their masters dying. And it's been really interesting. I was interviewing some folks at hospice, and they said that many times they know when someone's very close to dying. One way is what we've been talking about is visitations, that the dying see people in the room who had passed before them. But the other is that animals become very possessive. So, these hospice workers were saying they would come to the house and, the dog would be just sitting in the corner and everything was fine, no problem. But the day that the owner was dying, the dog would be barking and like baring its teeth and, you can't come in here, and like very protective. And I thought that's something I've been hearing more of lately, which has been interesting to me.
Really?
Yeah. I'll be curious. Yeah.
That would really be a curious thing. I mean, because we all read about, like cats in nursing homes.
I love that. I love Oscar. I think his name is Oscar.
And it's because, well, cats, especially dogs, are sensitive too. But cats are associated with they can go either way. They can go into the unseen and come back. So. And I observed one cat do that, but it was with my dog. A dog I had that died. I had a cat named Taro, and he would just sit by shadow. He liked to be outside, but in this instance, like several days before my dog got sick, he just laid next to him. I even have pictures of him.
Oh my! Wow.
So I guess guarding, reacting to things that are not there, but guarding from other people. They just get really possessive about it. But Dean, let me get you in here with some more comments.
Well, the dog that I have now is my sister that passed away a couple of years ago, and that dog was with her when she passed, and we didn't find her till the next morning. And we had to break in to her place to get her out. And the dog was sitting by her chair that she passed in. And, I mean, her dog is a female, but she didn't act scared or mean or anything. She just wanted out of there. But
Wow.
I do have a cousin that's a psychic, and she had came to him, and my sister came to him and
Mm.
said that she kept trying to pet her dog to calm her down, and her hand kept going through the dog.
Mm.
And she couldn't understand that she had passed already. And
Oh.
my cousin
Oh,
tried to tell her, you did
wow.
die, you passed on. She's like, no, I didn't. And she was kind of
Wow.
cocky like that, you know.
Mhm.
She's like, no,
Right.
I didn't. And he's like, well, you're holding your baby that passed away many years ago,
Wow.
and your other animal is on your shoulder. She had a ferret.
Mm.
So then, she finally understood that she passed on, because she kept saying she was trying to talk to me. She was trying to talk to my husband, because we're the ones that found her, and we wouldn't respond back to her, and she couldn't understand why.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's wow, that's powerful that this
You never told me that, Dean. You never
oh,
told me that story.
sorry.
That's how, I mean, like,
Yeah,
I'm not mad at you, but I was like, that's interesting. I mean, I know who
that
you're talking
is.
about, Danny, but and
Yeah.
Danny, uh, he died. He had an actual death experience and came back, and he came back as a psychic.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can you
so
believe
common.
that? I mean, he came back, and and I believe him because he read me cold. I didn't give him any information. He had just met me, and he described somebody. He said, there's a woman with you, and she looks like she has like, dark hair. She's short. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's 50% of women. Now,
Yeah.
and I mean, I
That sounds like
believe
me,
in it, but
right?
I'm like, yeah, and he said, no, he said she's got glasses on, and it looks like they have gold rims. Well, my mom wore these mother of pearl glasses that, the rims of them. And I was like, yeah, I said, I think I know who you're talking. He went on, and I was like, yeah, you need to tell her that she needs to be with my daughter, because my daughter was in the Navy. She needs to go be with her, because she's supposed to be her guardian angel. I was like, you
Right.
tell her that she don't need to be over here making crafts with me. She needs to be in
Uh,
Italy watching my kid. But he didn't, and Dean can tell you, he wasn't like that before.
No,
He
no.
came back, and now and that's happened, I guess, more frequently than people think too.
Oh, it's so common. I mean, this is one thing that Raymond has taught me, Raymond Moody has taught me, that many times people have near-death experiences and come back with some kind of gift. Oftentimes, people are just more intuitive. I interviewed people for my book about this, and there was one gentleman, again, the kind of person who didn't believe in any of this kind of stuff. He was a contractor, plumber, and he had a terrible accident on a job. And what happens now is things come in repetition, and we also see repetition in the language of people when they're dying. There's a lot of repetition, more than we see in ordinary speech. And this guy says that whenever he hears something in threes in repetition, he knows it's precognitive, or that it's a psychic thought. But he had never had that before he had this near-death experience where hold on, sorry about that. We had this very serious accident, and there are so many cases. There's that gentleman, I hope I'm saying his name right, Eddie Chikori, I think. He was a physician, and he was struck by lightning, and then when he came back, he could play the piano. He could never play the piano. He became, a master pianist within a matter of years, which most people take
That's
lifetimes.
wild. Yeah, that's wild.
There
Come
are
back
these
with a skill that you didn't have, or you know. Um,
or healers. I interviewed several
mhm.
people who are healers, and yeah, I think that's very, very common. And
So,
that,
so
yeah,
you're this kind of this convinces you there's something after, right? I mean, Dean and I have encountered it, as like I said, ghosts and spirits, etc. So, but this convinces you. I mean, even your father, who didn't believe in God, do you think that what he discovered was God on the other side? Because they say God, and you guys got the God, the Jews. We got Jesus, but you've got the God, and I find that a lot of Jewish people question whether there is a heaven and
I
whatnot. But
know.
and sometimes I've kind of just said, well, the belief in Jesus or whatever. But I mean, I guess he found out that all of that was true. And did you feel like he and other people were like really interacting with God, the love, basically the love that we are supposed to be the emanation of the love of the divine God. And we are his love and we're here to love him. Do you think that that's what your father went into? Like, when he finally did pass, and do you think he was, I can't get the words right, but absorbed into that kind of, that kind of a thing, the feeling of love and the answers to his questions that he had all his life. Do you feel that way?
I do. He didn't articulate that, and he wouldn't have because of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
He could talk about angels. I don't think he would have ever talked about God. But one of the things that he did, which is also very common that we found in our research, he started reaching up, right? Way before people start using their hands. There's one story. So, yes, I mean, and what is he reaching up to, right? What was he reaching up to? And we see this in so many people. One person who's a friend of mine came to one of my book signings in California, and he also is a skeptic, or had been. And then his father had this disease. I don't know exactly what it was, but his arms had totally atrophied, so he couldn't move them. And the same thing, the day before he died, he reached up and said, "Mom." And my friend, who was a total skeptic, was like, how the heck do you explain that? Right? How do you, what is that? What are they reaching to? And here was a man whose arms were totally atrophied, just like people who during that terminal lucidity where suddenly they're speaking just like they were fine or they're fine. Where does that come from? So in terms of my dad, I don't know. He never really used the word God, but first he was totally at peace, which I was someone, too, who was really afraid of dying before I did this research. And Dr. Moody and I had a really funny we speak, we become friends, which has been a huge blessing, as I mentioned before, and we speak probably weekly. And he went out to California, and he was joking about all the people with tattoos. I mean, it's all over the country now, but at the time it was really big in California and on the West Coast. And he was making fun of it, sort of, because he's 73, and he's like, oh, my God, all these kids have tattoos. And he said, I think I have to get a tattoo now. And I said, yeah. And I said, what's it going to say, Raymond? He said, well, I've been thinking about it. I think I want to put a big tattoo on my chest that says, do not resuscitate. And, and he was talking about how at this time, I don't know if he knows about him, but he's a very intellectual person. And he actually still didn't totally believe in an afterlife until just only 3 years ago. Because he was the kind of person who was just wanted to keep his mind open and always be, he's a man with a PhD plus an MD. The guy is a very smart and brain kind of smart person. But, he said to me, I'm at the point, he said, I'm ready to go when it's my time because I know that it's fine, that it's a beautiful transition in a beautiful place. And in the 5 years of doing this research, I was one of those people who hated going on airplanes because I would get scared, right? And and I one of the things I noticed is I lost my fear of flying as I did this research because I really lost. I'm not going to run in front of a truck tomorrow morning. It's not like I've lost my fear of dying that much. I love being alive. But I really feel there is, without a doubt, there's something that exists beyond the veil. There is just no doubt in my mind. And there's so much we haven't had a chance to talk about tonight that's really convinced me that something definitely lives on. And I don't feel afraid of dying at all in the way that I do. I still want to live as much as I can, but I'm not afraid the way I used to be.
Yeah, but you still got to die to get there. You got to be sick or, the thing falls out of the sky. Well, let me ask you this question. We're getting close to the end. Did you record anyone who was having negative experiences? Because we've often heard, throughout paranormal research, et cetera, and we've seen it dramatized on TV where somebody is dying and does not want to die because whatever has come, whatever they're seeing is so terrifying. We have like 3 minutes left. Can you give a quick answer about that? Have you ever encountered anyone who was really upset And that's what they were talking about. They were afraid because of what they were seeing coming for them.
A couple of people referred to the men in black suits.
Mm.
And a couple of people had that. Again, I think probably our research is slightly slanted towards the positive because people brought us stuff they wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple of instances where one person, yelled at the end BS. I'm not going to say the whole word, but
was he from Texas?
And then there were several people who just said, "Help me, I'm afraid." Yeah, there were.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I think that is a reality, and it's a smaller percentage of people, but it is a reality.
Yeah, it's always. I mean, that's where I guess living your life, comes into play, and trying to do the best, the best thing. But I think even there's even in people, at least in what I've read about it, who've had near-death experiences that were very, jarring and upset. I think there's something there if they would only just look for it. In other words, there's some piece there. Um, and what we find as paranormal researchers and in the occult is that people sometimes refuse to see. They are so concentrated on their fear. They're concentrated on, on how awful they're going to go to hell. They bring the dogma and everything with them. And then some people are just evil. I mean, whoever it is, let's say he could have been a black Satanist, black magic and all this other stuff. And then at the last minute, you got to answer to somebody for the things that magic gives you. And, that's, so, I mean, it's a good way to, it's a good cautionary tale to say, live your life, as good as you can or as well as you can.
Well,
so,
we definitely die. I mean, the one thing I can say that I've seen is we die the way we live. It's
mm-hmm.
seems, and I think if we have some kind of connection to some kind of divine source, even though my father may not have believed as God as we think of him, my father always had a really good heart and always
mm-hmm.
cultivated those kinds of things in his life. So I do think, to a large degree, we die the way we live.
Well, that's good to stop it there. Yeah, we've come to the end of the show. This was very fascinating, and one day I'd like to have both you and Dr. Moody on again. That would be a fantastic show. Yeah, just to.
Enjoy that.
So if anyone wants to find your book or find you for more, just more in depth, where would they contact you or look for you?
They can find finalwordsproject.org. And there's a lot of information there. You can get a free first chapter of my book there, and you can also order the book through Final Words Project or Amazon.com or any of the other online bookstores. Yeah.
That's excellent. And they can contact you basically through the website.
Yes, there's an email there, finalwordsproject@gmail.com, and I'm always delighted to get emails from people. And we also have a way that people can submit their stories onto the website, and they can see that there, too.
Oh, good. I think I'm going to get your book.
Thank you.
At this point, there's a few ahead of me, but it's like I need all the help I can get. That's how our family is. It's like, you start looking around and going, no, I'm younger than you. It's as if death is like, okay, who's next? The oldest ones. It's like pushing them, going, hey, it's you, Cindy. Ronnie. It's not, that's just, I guess, laughing in the face of death. We were doing it at the funeral. It's like, who's next? Ain't me. But anyway, well, you have a great weekend. We thank you for joining us. And as usual, Bernadine outdoes herself with our guests. So
yes, thank you. And I will contact you, and maybe we can get you and Dr. Moody on next year.
Yeah, because we're booked through the end of the year.
We're booked through then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. Yeah,
well, thank you so much. Yeah.
You bet, it was a pleasure. All right.
I'm
have
gonna check
night.
it out. You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.
Yeah, Dean. There it goes. There goes the Skype connection. You outdid yourself as usual.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're just at our break. Let's see. We're gonna take our break, and we will be back on the other side of it to wrap it all up. During the break, you're going to hear you're going to hear a Who song for a special friend of mine who reminded me that the drummer Keith Moon, the drummer of the Who, died 39 years ago today. And then she said he was the best drummer in the world, and I said no, that would be John Bonham. So, and we're back in high school going, no, Keith, no, John. Anyway, listen for Magic Butts during the break, and we'll see you on the other side. You're listening to the Supernatural Substation on the United Public Radio Network.
You're clear, guys.
Right? I have to tinkle.
Go tinkle, girl.
We're back, and this is the Supernatural Substation. So, if you've been listening for like almost 2 hours now, you know we had a great guest, right, Bernadine?
Yes, ma'am.
I still don't know, though. Yeah, I mean, I know that ghosts are real. Yeah, I've seen dead people and all. It's like, but when it comes down to you, it's like, my turn? No, no, at this point, I'm just out trying to outlive my mom. She passed when she was 59. I'm like, just a couple of years, let's get by. But yeah, she had some wonderful stories. I'm going to have to get her book and check into it because that's a really interesting project too,
Yeah.
because people don't really think about that. They do. I mean, a lot of people have, right before he died, he said such and such and all, but, then like, they tell it to the family and then a generation passes and, something significant or, to that person that passed might just be forgotten. So I think she's doing a real service, and Dr. Moody for, just basically archiving a life. You have pictures, as a little baby, and then all the milestones of life. So I guess death is the last milestone, and what you're saying as you're going through the experience is important, So
And
I guess
to a
that's.
grieving family, they may
Mhm.
forget all the words at the end, you know.
Mhm.
But for
How
someone
about
researching and studying it, they'll remember.
right? Exactly. And I think people could actually record it if they did it tastefully and tactfully, and ask the family, because then again, that's your loved one's voice, not just
Yeah.
the words, um, that's and you can hear then the intonation and all that of the words, but in my family, like what we have, and I'm sure you have this too, is when when you think you're dying, I'm gonna die, I mean, it's just so my grandmother who died and came back, and lived for 12 hours. One of the times when she thought she was gonna die, uh, she she was at home in her bed, and my mother goes over there and she had something very important to tell my mother. So my mom goes in the room and she says, I'm gonna die. And she says, when I'm dead, Santa, my mom's name was Santa, she said, over there in the linen closet, put your hand in between the sheets. And mama did. And she said, all my jewelry is in that box. All the jewelry is in that box. She says, take it now because that Dago bastard, he's going to pawn it. My grandpa, So she made mama take all of, and she didn't die. So she asked for him back. And then eventually she did. But she was like, he's going to pawn it. He's going to be at the pawn shop. It's, I mean, I guess she knew my grandpa,
Hmm.
for what he was. I guess he wasn't like that, though. He wasn't that kind of a person. I'm being eaten by a Doberman pinscher, if you're
Sounds
interested.
like it. Yeah.
This dog doesn't know her strength. It's look, folks, it's like I've been beat up. So it's everybody's fantasy, I guess. Everybody thinks I'm such a bitch. It's like, yeah, the dog is chewing on her. Ah, anyway. So we all have to go there. So what do you think? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, a couple of nights ago, Shane was fussing about his toothache because he had a tooth pulled a couple of days ago. And I told him, I said, if you go before me, I'm gonna be screwed because my kid, he's just somewhere off. I mean, I wouldn't want him to take care of me at the end days just because he just, he's a little loopy
Yeah,
sometimes. But
yeah.
Shane's like, you're probably gonna outlive all of us. I said, you know what? I had my cards read one time by Mr. Ron, and he's like, you're gonna live till you're over 90 years old. I'm like, hell no. No, I refuse.
Yes.
No. I said,
See, my yeah,
I'm
no.
already grouchy. You think I'm gonna be how I'm gonna be in my 90s? I said,
That's
I'm in my 50s. You know how mean I'm gonna be in a nursing home?
oh God. My dad was 88 and skinny. He was losing all, the muscle mass. I mean, and everything is shrinking. And, anytime you took him out to eat, you had to bring a pillow because his butt was bony and he couldn't sit on a chair, and I'm like, he really
They
wasn't enjoying
they
the
do
quality of
deserve
life.
to be grouchy, and a lot of people don't
Yeah.
understand that. Some elderly people are in good shape. Don't get me wrong; they're probably better shape than me, but
But they're
some
grouchy
are
too.
so in pain,
Mm.
that how can they sit there and be happy? I would be so. I mean, I'm in pain a lot, and I'm grouchy, and I'm in my 50s. Give me 30
Yeah.
more years of this.
Yes.
You're not gonna like me.
Well, it all has to do, I guess, with quality of life. I have a grandmother on my mother's side who lived to be 98 years old, but it's really, in like my dad's situation, what is really sad is when they outlive um, everyone.
Everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their brothers and sisters pass, and they're the last one, and
To
that
me, I
happens.
would be ready to go and be like, party on the other side. That's where everybody's at.
I guess I'll get over there and say, I don't know who's dying ahead of me, but I'd be like, you see where you make these plans. They say you say, okay, when I'm gone, then God laughs at us, is what they say. You know, I mean, he already knows, I guess, how I'm going to die and everything. I think I'm going to be devoured by a Doberman
I'm
Pinscher.
sure he has
You
a
hear, do you
sense
hear
of
the sound
humor.
effect? There you go.
I sure
We're
do.
the only paranormal show with sound effects in the background. The growling dog, the howling
Z,
dog, Zeke the zombie. Yeah, there he is. Zeke.
you're gonna have to bring Zeke to the convention.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to hide him in something. We're down to 3 minutes. Speaking of which, 2 weeks. What is it? 2 weekends? Three
Yes,
weekends? The 20. Well, I've got the wrong calendar. So
22nd through the 24th.
Gulf Coast Paracon in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's a really nice little con. It's one day. Dean and I will be there with some handiwork, and we're going to be on a panel, and we'll be around for questions and stuff like that. We're going to be broadcasting. We'll have to figure it out how, but we'll be broadcasting that Friday night from Gulf Coast Paracon. If you're looking for something to do on the Gulf Coast, check it out and get your tickets, and maybe you'll be a man on the street or a ghost on the street interview for Dean and I the night of the convention. So they have a costume contest, and it's 80s week. I saw a guy today that looked like he walked right out of the 80s. He didn't have a mullet, but he had a tank, like a wife beater, and these really short white shorts. So
Oh
he
my
was in
goodness.
Chick-fil-A, and then we said, oh wait, he may be an evacuee. So, but anyway, we have come to the end. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So if somebody wants to contact you for an investigation, give them that email again.
It is Bernadine, BERNADINE at lspr-society.com,
Excellent.
or
If
on
you
Facebook under
please
Bernadine LeBlanc.
go look for her. You can look for me, and you can also find both of us at the Supernatural Substation Facebook page. Stay tuned now for Miss Kathy Bilski, Quantum Leap, and stay up and turn around and come back at 2 a.m. And tonight's Terminus, Dark Ambient Radio, courtesy of me, myself, and I, is Tooth and Claw. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty primordial and primitive. So at any rate, that wraps up another one. We're gonna have another great guest next Friday night, so be sure and tune in and let us know. Contact us with opinions, comments, etc. You've been listening to us on the United Public Radio Network and iHeart Network radio partner. Have a great weekend. Say good night, Dean.
Night, night.
Nighty night.
The art of loaning tools has been practiced and perfected by neighbors and family for years because the idea of buying a tool that you only need to use once doesn't make sense. That's why AutoZone has a free Loan-A-Tool program. It's a helpful, easy way to get you a torque wrench, a ball joint replacer, and 100 other specialty tools to get that job done. Like your neighbor Keith would. He wouldn't charge you for it, and neither do we, because that'd be nonsense. Let's get you what you need. Deposit required. Restrictions and details in store.
Get in the zone.